I didn't know a piece of paper could kill a person. Not quickly, not with blood or violence that makes the neighbors call the police. No, this kind of killing takes decades. It's slow. It's quiet. It happens at the kitchen table, in the bedroom when you're lying awake at 3 a.m., in the grocery store when you see an old couple arguing over which brand of tea to buy, and you remember you used to have someone to argue with too. 40 years. That's how long it took me to die from that single sheet of paper. 40 years of breathing, working, eating, sleeping, waking up every single morning to a life that wasn't mine. 40 years of being alive but not living. Of being a mother but not a wife. Of being a woman but not her, not the woman I was supposed to become. My name is Floral. And I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest. I was not stupid. I was not naive. I was a woman who trusted the man she loved, who signed a piece of paper without reading every single word because he was rushing us out the door to catch a flight to Jamaica for what was supposed to be our second honeymoon. I was a woman who believed that love meant trust, and trust meant not treating the father of your children like a stranger holding a contract. I was wrong. I was so terribly, devastatingly wrong. And by the time I understood what that document really said, by the time I saw the lie hidden in the legal language, by the time a lawyer looked at me across his mahogany desk with something between pity and disgust and said, "Mrs. Floral, I'm sorry, but there's nothing you can do." By then, 40 years had passed. 40 years. My children were grown. My hair was gray. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted, the man whose name I still carried, he was dead. And the lie he had buried in that document had outlived him. It started, as these things always do, with love. I was 23 years old when I met him. His name was George, and he was handsome in a way that made other men uncomfortable. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hands that looked like they'd worked hard their whole life and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He smiled a lot at me in those days. We met at a church social in Kingston. I was helping my aunt serve the fried plantains and rice and peas, and he walked in late, dust on his shoes from the drive, apologizing to everyone he passed. When he got to me, he stopped mid-sentence. Just stopped. Looked at me like I was something he'd been searching for his whole life and suddenly found in the most unexpected place. "I'm sorry," he said, and I could tell he'd forgotten what he was apologizing for. "I think I'm lost." "This is a church social," I told him. "If you're lost, you came to the right place." He laughed. It was a big laugh, the kind that fills a room and makes everyone around him feel warmer. "Can I stay lost a little longer?" That was George, charming without trying, romantic without planning. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt since my mother died when I was 16. He made me feel like maybe the world wasn't such a cold, hard place after all. We married 8 months later. My aunt cried. His mother, a stern woman from Trinidad with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, shook my hand and said, "You take care of my boy, you hear? He's all I've got left." I promised I would. I meant it with my whole heart. The first 10 years were good. Not perfect, no marriage is perfect, but good. We had our struggles. Money was tight. George worked construction and I stayed home with our 2 little girls, Patricia and Denise. We lived in a small house in Kingston with a zinc fence and a mango tree in the backyard that the girls loved to climb. George would come home covered in dust and sweat, and I'd have dinner waiting, and we'd sit on the porch in the evenings and watch the sun go down over the neighborhood. "You happy, Floral?" he asked me one night. It was a random Tuesday. Nothing special had happened. The girls were inside arguing over a doll. The neighbor's dog was barking. The whole scene was ordinary, unremarkable. But I remember it still. I remember the way the light hit his face. I remember the weight of his hand on my knee. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what I prayed for when I was a girl. This is what my mother wanted for me. "I'm happy," I said. And I was. The first crack appeared in year 11. George's company offered him a promotion, but it meant moving to Montego Bay. New city, new house, new schools for the girls. I didn't want to go. Kingston was home. My aunt was still alive then, and my friends, and the church where I'd served plantains the day I met him. Everything I knew was in Kingston. "It's just for a few years," George said. "Make more money, set the girls up better. Then we come back." I trusted him. Of course I trusted him. He was my husband, the father of my children, the man who still looked at me sometimes like I was that girl behind the food table. We moved. Montego Bay was different. Bigger. Faster. People had more money, nicer cars, bigger houses. Our new neighborhood was quiet in a way that felt lonely. The neighbors were polite but distant. The girls struggled at their new school. I struggled everywhere. George traveled more for work, weeks at a time sometimes. I'd sit in that new house with its modern kitchen and its central air conditioning and its empty rooms, and I'd feel like a ghost in someone else's life. "When do we go back to Kingston?" I asked one night. He just returned from a 2-week trip. He was tired, distracted, already looking past me at whatever came next. "Floral, don't start." "I'm not starting anything. I'm asking a question. You said a few years, it's been 3. Things changed." "What things?" He didn't answer, just picked up his bag and walked to the bedroom. That was the first time I felt it, that small, cold thing moving in the space between us. Not big enough to name, not sharp enough to cut. Just there, like a draft from a window I couldn't find. Year 14, my aunt died. I took the girls and went back to Kingston for the funeral. George couldn't come work, he said. I understood. Or I told myself I understood. Standing at the gravesite, watching them lower my aunt into the ground, I felt more alone than I had since my mother died. My aunt had raised me after Mama passed. She was the one who taught me to cook, to pray, to be a woman. And now she was gone, and my husband wasn't even there to hold my hand. "Mummy, why Daddy didn't come?" Patricia asked on the drive back to Montego Bay. "He had to work, baby. He's always working." She was 9 years old, and she already saw what I was trying not to see. Year 16, George started talking about retiring early. "Few more years," he said. "Few more years, we sell the house, move somewhere warm, Barbados maybe, or back to Trinidad, see my people." I thought we were going back to Kingston. "Kingston's changed." "Everything changes, George." He looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, fear, I couldn't name it then, I still can't name it now. "You still love me, Floral?" The question caught me off guard. We weren't the type of couple who asked things like that. We showed love, through dinner on the table, through the life we built, through 23 years of waking up in the same bed. We didn't need to say it. "You know I do," I said. He nodded, looked away. "Good, that's good." Year 18, the girls left for university. Patricia went to Kingston, then overseas to England for nursing school. Denise chose Canada, Toronto, a city so cold I couldn't imagine it. The house got quiet, too quiet. I started volunteering at the church, teaching Sunday school, anything to fill the hours. George was home more by then. His traveling had slowed down. We had dinner together most nights, watched television in the living room, went to bed at the same time. On paper, we were fine. On paper, everything was fine. But I'd catch him sometimes, staring at nothing, worrying about something he wouldn't name. I'd ask what was wrong, and he'd shake his head, force a smile, say, "Nothing, Floral, just thinking." About what? Getting old, I guess, running out of time. "We've got plenty of time." He didn't answer. Year 21, George got sick. It started small, tiredness, weight loss, a cough that wouldn't go away. He ignored it for months. By the time I convinced him to see a doctor, it was too late. Lung cancer. But he never smoked. I told the doctor, like that would change something. There are other causes, Mrs. Floral. Environmental factors, genetics. Sometimes we just don't know. I held George's hand in that sterile office, and for the first time in years, he held mine back the way he used to. Tight, desperate, like I was the only thing keeping him from falling. "I'm scared, Floral." "I know, baby, I know." The next 2 years were hard. Chemotherapy, radiation, good days and bad days. The girls came home when they could, Patricia from England, Denise from Canada. We took turns sitting with him, feeding him when he couldn't feed himself, reading to him when he couldn't sleep. Through it all, George was quiet. Not withdrawn exactly, but like he was carrying something he couldn't put down. I thought it was the illness, the fear, the knowledge that his time was running out. I was wrong. Year 23, George died. I was holding his hand when it happened. 3 in the morning. The hospital room was dark except for the machines, and the machines were beeping slower, until they weren't beeping at all. George. Nothing. George, can you hear me? Nothing. A nurse came in, checked his pulse, looked at me with that professional sympathy they teach you in nursing school. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Floral. I sat there for an hour after she left, holding his hand, watching his face. He looked peaceful. He looked like he'd finally put down whatever he'd been carrying all those years. I didn't cry until the sun came up. The funeral was at the church in Montego Bay. George's mother flew in from Trinidad, old now, fragile, but still with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. Patricia flew in from England, Denise from Canada. Friends came, neighbors came, people I hadn't seen in years came. He was a good man, they told me. A hard worker, a provider. You were lucky, Floral. I nodded, smiled, thanked them for coming. Afterward, at the house, George's mother took me aside. You have the papers. What papers? The papers, child. The house, the bank accounts. Everything George left you. Oh, the will. The lawyer said he'd mail everything next week. She looked at me funny, opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, closed it. You read everything carefully, you hear. Don't sign nothing without reading. Of course. She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. The lawyer's office was downtown Montego Bay, in a building that smelled like old money and furniture polish. I wore my best dress, navy blue, the one I'd bought for Patricia's wedding. I'd never met with a lawyer before. I didn't know what to expect. His name was Mr. Patterson. White hair, wire-rimmed glasses, hands that folded and unfolded on his desk while he talked. He offered me tea. I accepted. It felt like the thing you did in offices like that. Mrs. Floral, he began, first, let me express my deepest condolences for your loss. George was a client for many years. I respected him greatly. Thank you. Now the estate. He opened a file, pulled out papers. There are a few matters we need to discuss. I sipped my tea, waited. The house, your home, is part of the estate, but there's a complication. George took out a second mortgage several years ago. The balance is substantial. A second mortgage, for what? I don't have those details, Mrs. Floral. I only have the documents. I set down my tea. How substantial? He told me the number. I couldn't breathe for a moment. That's almost the whole value of the house. Yes, I'm afraid so. But we paid off the first mortgage years ago. George told me. Mrs. Floral, he folded his hands again. There's more. The more was everything. The bank accounts almost empty. George had been withdrawing money for years. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. The retirement savings gone. The investments he'd talked about, the ones that were supposed to take care of us in our old age, non-existent. Where did it go? I asked. My voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. I don't know, Mrs. Floral. George handled his own finances. I only saw what he chose to share. But you're his lawyer. You must know something. Mr. Patterson looked at me for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer, pulled out a document, and slid it across the desk. This is the will. I need you to understand it before you sign anything. I picked it up, started reading. It took me 3 tries to get through the first page. The language was dense, full of legal terms I didn't understand. But one thing was clear. George had left everything to his mother. I don't understand. I looked up at Mr. Patterson. This says his mother gets the house, the money, everything. Yes. But we've been married for 40 years. Our daughters, his daughters, they're entitled. Mrs. Floral, his voice was gentle, but there was something underneath it, something careful. When did you and George marry? 1965, August. Why? And where? Kingston, at the Holy Trinity Church. What does this matter? He pulled out another document, older, yellowed at the edges. He placed it next to the will. Do you recognize this? I looked at it. It was a form of some kind. Official, stamped. At the top it said, Certificate of Marriage. This is our marriage certificate. Look at the date, Mrs. Floral. I looked. August 1965. Holy Trinity Church. Everything I expected to see. Now look at this. He slid another document next to it. Similar, almost identical. This is also a marriage certificate. Same names, same church, but a different date. I looked. George Floral. Floral George. Holy Trinity Church. January 1962. I shook my head. I don't understand. We didn't marry in 1962. I was still in school in 1962. Mr. Patterson leaned back in his chair, removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes. Mrs. Floral, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Okay. Did you sign any documents related to your marriage? Any papers at all, before or after the ceremony? I thought about it. The wedding was so long ago. 40 years. The details had faded, softened, turned into the kind of memories you don't examine too closely. There were papers, I said slowly. The week before the wedding, George brought them home, said it was just formalities, registering the marriage with the government, making sure everything was legal. Did you read them? He was rushing. We had to catch a flight to Jamaica for our honeymoon. He said just sign here, here, and here. We'll look at the details later. Did you look at the details later? I stared at him. No, I trusted him. He was my husband. Why wouldn't I trust my husband? Mr. Patterson didn't answer. He didn't have to. What George had done, what that documented lie contained, was simple and devastating. In 1962, 3 years before I met him, George had married another woman, a woman named Beatrice. They'd had a ceremony at Holy Trinity, signed the papers, started a life together. By 1965, that marriage was over. Beatrice had left him, moved back to her family in Barbados, but George had never filed for divorce. When he met me later that year, when he decided he wanted to marry me, he had a problem. He was still legally married to someone else. If he told me the truth, he might lose me. So instead, he found another way. The documents I signed the week before our wedding weren't marriage registration forms. They were something else entirely. What George did was create a second marriage certificate, a fraudulent one, with a new date, August 1965. He filed it alongside the original, making it look like the 1962 certificate had been. What? A mistake? A clerical error? I still don't fully understand the mechanics of it. What I understand is the result. In the eyes of the law, our 40-year marriage, the life we built, the children we raised, the love I gave him, never happened. We weren't married. I wasn't his wife. The house wasn't mine. The money wasn't mine. The pension, the retirement savings, the life insurance, none of it was mine. In the eyes of the law, I was nothing more than a woman who'd lived with a man for 40 years, who'd raised his children, who'd nursed him through his final illness, who'd held his hand when he died. And the legal wife, the woman he married in 1962, the woman he never divorced, the woman who'd been living in Barbados for 4 decades. She was the one entitled to everything. There's more, Mr. Patterson said. I couldn't imagine how there could be more. The woman, Beatrice, she died 5 years ago. George knew. He must have known. But instead of marrying you legally, instead of fixing what he'd done, he let it stand. Yes. Why? Mr. Patterson shook his head. I can't answer that, Mrs. Floral. I can only tell you what the documents say. The documents said everything and nothing. They explained how George had been able to take out mortgages and loans without my signature, because I had no legal standing. They explained why the bank accounts were in his name only, because I had no legal right to them. They explained the strange looks, the careful questions, The moments when people seemed to be waiting for me to understand something I didn't know I was supposed to understand. 40 years. 40 years of my life, built on a lie. I went home that day and sat in the living room, my living room I'd always thought, and looked at the photographs on the walls. Our wedding photo, me in white, George in his good suit, both of us so young and so sure. The girls as Bobbies, the girls at their first day of school, the girls at their graduations, Patricia's wedding, Denise's engagement. Grandchildren I'd held in my arms, children I'd babysat, lives I'd helped shape. None of it was real. Not legally, not on paper. On paper, I didn't exist. The weeks that followed were a nightmare. George's mother filed a claim on the estate. Beatrice's family, distant relatives I'd never heard of, filed claims too. The bank sent letters. The mortgage company sent letters. Lawyers sent letters. So many letters, all of them saying the same thing in different ways. You have no standing. You have no rights. You have nothing. I hired my own lawyer. A woman this time, young and fierce, with an office above a bakery in downtown Montego Bay. Her name was Mrs. Reynolds, and she was the first person who looked at me like I wasn't crazy. "This is fraud," she said, reading through the documents. Clear, documented fraud. George knew exactly what he was doing. "Can we fight it?" She was quiet for a long moment. "We can try." We tried. For 2 years we tried. We filed motions. We gathered evidence. We tracked down witnesses. The priest who'd married us, retired, living in a nursing home, his memory mostly gone. The women who'd been my bridesmaids, scattered across 3 countries, their recollections fuzzy after 4 decades. The neighbors who'd watched us build our life together, some dead, some moved away, those who remained unsure what they'd actually seen. The other side had documents, certified documents, official documents, documents that said George married Beatrice in 1962 and never divorced her, documents that said I wasn't his wife. "The problem," Mrs. Reynolds explained one afternoon, "is that George isn't here to explain himself. If he were alive, we could question him. We could force him to admit what he did. But without him, I have nothing." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The case ended in mediation. A windowless room. A mediator in a gray suit. George's mother on one side, old and frail but still with those sharp eyes. Beatrice's nephew on the other side, a man I'd never met, looking at me like I was trying to steal something from his family. I walked away with almost nothing. A small settlement, enough to rent an apartment for a few years, enough to buy food and pay bills, but nothing like what I should have had. Nothing like what 40 years of marriage should have earned me. "It's not fair," Mrs. Reynolds said afterward. "You know it's not fair." Fair stopped mattering a long time ago. I didn't tell the girls the full truth for a long time. What could I say? Your father lied to me for 40 years. Your father made sure I had nothing when he died. Your father's love, the love we all believed in, was built on a foundation of paper and ink and deliberate deception. How do you tell your children that? Patricia figured it out first. She was always the sharper one. She came to visit 6 months after the mediation ended, found me in my tiny rental apartment, looked at the photographs I'd hung on the walls, the same photographs, the only proof I had that my life had meant something, and said, "Mummy, what happened to the house?" I told her. Not everything, not the full ugly truth, but enough. She didn't cry. That's not Patricia's way. She sat very still for a long time, and then she said, "I'm going to call Denise." The girls handled it differently. Patricia got angry at the system, at the lawyers, at her father for what he'd done. Denise got sad for me for what I'd lost, for the childhood she'd thought she had. Both of them tried to help, sent money when they could, called every week, invited me to visit, Patricia in England, Denise in Canada. I went eventually, stayed with Patricia for a month, helped with her children, my grandchildren, and tried to pretend that everything was normal, that I was just a grandmother visiting her daughter, that my life hadn't been stolen by a piece of paper and the man I'd loved. But at night, lying in Patricia's guest room, I'd think about it. The document, the lie, The moment in George's office when he'd handed me those papers and said, "Just sign here, here, and here." 40 years. 40 years of my life, reduced to a signature I hadn't read. George's mother died 3 years after George. I went to the funeral. I don't know why. Maybe because she was the last link to him, to the life I'd thought I had. Maybe because I hoped for some kind of closure, some acknowledgement of what her son had done. I stood at the back of the church, apart from the family. Watched them carry her casket. Watched them lower her into the ground next to her son, next to George, in the plot I'd paid for, the one I'd chosen when I thought I was his widow. After the service, after the mourners drifted away, I stood alone at the gravesite. George on one side, his mother on the other. The woman who'd looked at me with sharp eyes for 40 years, silent now forever. I waited for something. Anger, sadness, relief, anything. Nothing came. I turned and walked away. 10 years passed, then 15, then 20. I got older. The girls got older. The grandchildren grew up, had children of their own. I became a great-grandmother, then a great-great-grandmother. I lived in a small apartment in Kingston, back where I started, back where I'd met George at that church social so many years ago. The church was still there. The food table was still there, though the woman serving plantains now was someone I didn't know. I went sometimes, on Sundays, and sat in the back and listened to the hymns, and remembered being 23 and falling in love. "You still think about him?" Denise asked once. She was visiting from Canada, older now herself, with gray in her hair and lines around her eyes. Every day, even after what he did. I thought about it. The love was real, Denise. The life we built, that was real. The lie at the end doesn't change the beginning. It changes everything. No, I shook my head. It changes the ending. The middle, the 40 years in between, that was ours. That was mine. He can't take that away. No piece of paper can take that away. But that's not entirely true. The lie did take things away. It took my home. It took my security. It took the peace of mind I should have had in my old age. It took the knowledge that my children would inherit something from the life I'd built with their father. It took the simple, fundamental truth of my marriage. The thing I'd believed in for 40 years. The thing that had defined me as a woman and a wife and a human being. It took all of that. What it couldn't take was the memory. The memory of George's hand in mine on that porch in Kingston, watching the sun go down. The memory of his laugh at the church social, big and warm and full of joy. The memory of the girls being born, of his face when he first held them, of the tears in his eyes when he said, "We made these, Floral. We made these beautiful girls." That was real. That was mine. And no documented lie could ever take that away. I'm 93 years old now. I've outlived George by 30 years. I've outlived his mother, and most of my friends, and more of my generation than I can count. I've watched my daughters become old women, my grandchildren become grandparents, my great-grandchildren become parents. I've seen the world change in ways I never could have imagined when I was 23 and falling in love at a church social. And I've thought, every day, about that piece of paper. Not with anger anymore. The anger faded somewhere around year 20. Not with regret. What's the point of regretting something you couldn't have known? Not even with sadness, really, though the sadness still visits sometimes, late at night, when the apartment is quiet and the memories are loud. I think about it with wonder. Wonder that one piece of paper could carry so much weight. Wonder that a man I loved could be so afraid, so broken, so unable to trust the love he'd been given. Wonder that 40 years of life could be erased with a signature I didn't read. And I think about what I would say to George if I could see him one more time. Not the George who was dying in that hospital bed. Not the George who kept secrets for 40 years. The George from the beginning. The George who walked into that church social with dust on his shoes and looked at me like I was something precious. I'd say, "You didn't have to do it. You didn't have to lie. I would have loved you anyway. I would have stayed anyway." The truth, the real truth, whatever it was, couldn't have been worse than the lie. But he never knew that. He died believing that his secret was the only thing holding us together. He died afraid, alone with his fear, unable to trust that the love we'd built was strong enough to survive the truth. That's the real tragedy. Not the money, not the house, not even the 40 years. The real tragedy is that he never knew he could have been loved anyway. If you're still here, still listening, still carrying your own secrets or your own pain, I want you to hear something. Love is stronger than fear. It's stronger than lies, stronger than secrets, stronger than the worst thing you've ever done or the worst thing that's ever been done to you. It's stronger than documented lies and legal betrayals and 40 years of silence. I learned that the hard way. I learned it in a lawyer's office, staring at papers that said my life wasn't real. I learned it in the years that followed, alone in my apartment, wondering if any of it mattered. I learned it sitting in that church, watching a new generation serve plantains and fall in love. Love matters. The love you give matters. The love you receive matters. The love you carry in your heart, even when the person who inspired it is gone, even when they hurt you, even when they lied, that love is yours. No one can take it. No document can erase it. No lie can make it untrue. George loved me, I know that now. He loved me in the only way he knew how, broken, afraid, unable to trust. And I loved him. 40 years of loving him. 40 years of building a life together. 40 years that were real, that were mine, that were ours. The lie at the end doesn't change that. Nothing changes that. My name is Floral. I was married to George for 40 years. And no documented lie will ever make that untrue. End of audiobook. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever loved someone who hurt you, if you've ever carried a secret or wished you'd said something different, please subscribe. Share your own story in the comments. You're not alone. None of us are alone.